The first call came at 5:17 a.m. My phone vibrated against the polished mahogany of my desk, a relentless buzz cutting through the pre-dawn silence of my D.C. office. I let it ring. I knew who it was. On the bank of monitors before me, every major news network ran the same headline, a firestorm I had personally ignited hours before. Senator Crane caught in sex scandal. The grainy photo showed him leaving a hotel, but the world didn't yet know the woman beside him, my wife, Eleanor. They called me Marcus Thorne, a master of political strategy at Meridian Public Affairs. They had no idea. The real campaign had just begun. This wasn't about politics. It was about ruin. The second call was her. I watched her name, Eleanor, flash on the screen and felt nothing but the cold, sharp focus of an architect watching a planned demolition. Eleanor wasn't just my wife, she was an asset. The elegant hostess with a smile that could disarm a firing squad. She was my greatest ally. Until she found a new one in Senator Daniel Crane. I built Daniel Crane from the ground up. I took a charismatic but clumsy state senator and forged him into a contender. I wrote his speeches, chose his ties, even coached the way he feigned humility for the cameras. He was my masterpiece, my legacy. Now my legacy was sleeping with my wife in a $500 a night hotel room. They thought they could dismantle my life in secret, piece by piece. A quiet coup. But in Washington, there's no such thing as quiet, there's only the controlled burn. And I was holding the match. The phone buzzed again, a frantic plea from a world already turned to ash. I silenced it and got back to work. It began, as most betrayals do, not with a bang, but with a detail. A single, misplaced line item on a credit card statement. A $200 brunch at a cafe in Georgetown on a Tuesday when Eleanor was supposed to be at a charity luncheon in Bethesda. An insignificant error to anyone else. To me, it was a tear in the fabric of the reality I had so carefully woven. Our marriage had always been a contract of mutual ambition. I was the architect of power. She was its beautiful, welcoming face. We were Meridian Public Affairs personified. We hosted the dinners, shook the hands, and shaped the narratives that ran this city. We were a fortress, and I never imagined the traitor was already inside the walls. After the brunch charge, I didn't hire a private investigator. PIs are messy, emotional, they leave a trail. I am a man of data. I pulled security logs from our building, cross-referencing them with her car's GPS history. I looked at Crane's public schedule, and then pulled the internal one he still shared with my senior staff. The data points began to connect, forming a constellation of deceit. Her late-night sessions with the Arts Council aligned perfectly with his strategy meetings at the Hay Adams Hotel. 2 weeks ago, I laid the evidence out on our glass dining table. Not photos. Just 3 pieces of paper. The credit card statement, a hotel folio paid in cash but booked under his aide's name, and a printout of their overlapping schedules for the past 6 months. Eleanor walked in, saw the papers, and her practiced smile faltered for the first time in a decade. She didn't even look at me. She looked at the evidence, as if it were an opponent. "Marcus," she started, her voice low. I cut her off. My own voice was calm, devoid of heat. "He was my project, Eleanor. My signature achievement. And you took him." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of damages. She finally met my eyes and I saw no remorse, only defiance. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just politics. Daniel is going places. He's the future. You're the man who builds the future for other people." That was it. The moment the contract was voided. She didn't see me as her husband. She saw me as a stepping stone that was no longer high enough. She and my own creation had made a strategic decision to merge their assets and cut me out of the deal. "You're right," I said, gathering the papers. "I do build things." I stood up from the table and looked down at the woman who had shared my bed and my ambitions for 15 years. "And I also know how to tear them down, to the foundation." She didn't scream or cry. She simply laughed. A short, sharp, dismissive sound that was far more insulting than any shout. "Tear it down, Marcus? You build sandcastles. Daniel and I are building an empire." She picked up her purse from the counter, the click of the clasp echoing in the silent room like a gavel. Then she was gone, leaving me in the fortress she thought I could no longer command. I didn't watch her leave. I went to my study, the one room in the house that was mine alone. My sanctuary. Tonight it was my armory. I sat at my desk, the city lights of D.C. glittering below like a field of scattered diamonds, and I began the meticulous process of dismantling an empire. Revenge is not a firestorm. It's a series of controlled demolitions. The first charge, the grainy photo of Crane leaving the hotel, was just to rattle the foundations. A warning shot. I sent it from a burner email to a junior blogger at Politico, someone hungry, and without the institutional loyalty to kill a story. I knew he'd run it without asking questions, eager to make a name for himself. It was live in 90 minutes. But the real weapon wasn't a photograph. It was the narrative. For the past 2 weeks, while they were playing house at the Hay Adams, I was an archaeologist, digging through the digital ruins of the campaign I'd built. Every email, every travel voucher, every donor call log. I knew where all the bodies were buried. I had supplied the shovels. I compiled everything into a single, encrypted file. I codenamed Legacy. It wasn't just proof of an affair, it was a mosaic of hypocrisy. There was the travel manifest showing Crane had used a private jet, paid for by a Family Values PAC, to fly to a weekend rendezvous with Eleanor in New York. There was the internal memo where he explicitly rejected a bill for paid family leave, sent from his phone at 2 a.m., time-stamped from the very hotel where he was betraying his own family. The masterpiece was an email chain between him and my wife, where they strategized about how to use connections at Meridian to secure his spot on the Senate Finance Committee, the very committee that would oversee his lover's father's hedge fund. It was perfect. A story not just of infidelity, but of corruption, greed, and staggering arrogance. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had betrayed every voter who believed in the folksy, honorable man I had invented. My phone rang. This time it was Crane's chief of staff, a panicked kid named Ben. I'd hired myself 3 years ago. "Marcus, we have a crisis. You have to help us spin this. The senator is unavailable." "Is he?" I said, my voice glacial. "Ben, a word of advice. When your ship is sinking, don't chain yourself to the anchor." I hung up before he could respond. Then, I opened a new email. The recipient was Sarah Jensen, the most feared investigative journalist at the Washington Post, a shark who smelled blood from a mile away. The subject line was simple: everything. I attached the legacy file. My message was even simpler. You wanted the real Daniel Crane story. Here it is. My compliments. I hit send. On my monitors, the initial scandal was raging. Pundits were speculating. Crane's office was issuing frantic no comments. They were fighting yesterday's battle. They had no idea the war had already been lost. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning softly, and watched the first alerts from the Washington Post begin to light up my screen. The controlled demolition had begun. And I was the only one with the blueprints. The Washington Post alert was a simple headline: Senator Crane, an empire of hypocrisy. It wasn't a story yet. It was a promise. A declaration of war from a cannon I had aimed and loaded myself. My phone buzzed on the desk. A single text from an unknown number. * holy hell, Thorne. Call you in an hour. I didn't need the signature. Sarah Jensen was in. The shark was circling. I stood and walked to the wet bar in the corner of my office, pouring 2 fingers of Macallan 18 into a heavy crystal glass. I didn't drink it. I just held it, the cool weight, a familiar anchor in the storm I was piloting. The soft click of the elevator doors opening in my private lobby didn't surprise me. The security override code was one we had shared. Eleanor stormed in, a vision of tailored fury. Her Chanel suit was immaculate, but her eyes were wild. The mask was gone. "Turn it off," she demanded, gesturing wildly at the screens. "Whatever you did, Marcus, turn it off right now." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "That's not how the news works, Eleanor. You of all people should know that." "This isn't news. This is a hit job. You're burning down everything we built." She spat, her voice tight with a panic she couldn't conceal. We didn't build anything. I corrected her, my voice quiet, almost conversational. I built it. You were just living in it. And you decided to redecorate with my biggest rival. Her face hardened. The panic was replaced by the familiar glint of defiance. Daniel will survive this. He's a fighter. He'll bury you for this. We will bury you. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. It didn't reach my eyes. I took a slow sip of the scotch. You're still thinking about the photo, aren't you? The little blog post. I gestured with my glass towards my phone. That was the appetizer. Sarah Jensen at the Post is serving the main course. The color drained from her face. Sarah Jensen wasn't some blogger. She was a career ender. What did you give her? She whispered, the fight finally gone from her voice. Everything, I said, placing the glass down with a quiet finality. I gave her the truth, the travel manifest, the pack money, the emails between you and Daniel planning how to use my company to advance his career after you'd both cut me loose. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. The full scope of the demolition was finally clear to her. She hadn't been a co-conspirator in a power play. She was just collateral damage. You wouldn't, she stammered. You said I build sandcastles. I reminded her, my voice as level as a blade. You were wrong. I build empires. And I am the only one who gets to tear them down. She didn't have a reply. She just stood there, broken, amidst the ruins of a life she thought was hers to command. She stared at me, the architect of her ruin, and for a moment I thought she might lunge, scream, or throw something. Instead, a shudder ran through her, a tremor of final, absolute defeat. The fight was over. The empire had fallen. She turned without another word and walked out, her footsteps silent on the expensive rug. The soft click of the elevator doors was a period at the end of a long, ugly chapter. I didn't watch her go. My attention was back on the monitors. The Washington Post story dropped at 6:01 a.m. It was a digital blitzkrieg. Sarah Jensen had deployed my entire arsenal. The headline was a cannon shot, Crane's campaign of deceit, PAC funds, private jets, and a secret affair. It was brutal, masterful. She laid out the timeline of the affair, juxtaposing it with his public appearances, championing family values. She published the flight manifests of the private jet, paid for by the American Family First PAC, and cross-referenced them with Eleanor's Instagram posts from New York City. She quoted, verbatim, the emails between Eleanor and Crane discussing my company, Meridian, as a disposable asset to be exploited. It wasn't a story about a cheating husband. It was a story about a corrupt, hypocritical fraud who used his power to enrich himself and deceive the public. The affair was just the lurid, captivating engine driving the narrative of his spectacular corruption. My wife wasn't the star of the show, she was just evidence. Exhibit A. My phone, which had been buzzing with panicked texts from Crane's staff, now began to light up with calls from my own. My partners at Meridian. My senior strategists. They were in the dark, watching the firm's signature client get immolated on the front page of the nation's most respected newspaper. They were terrified. I ignored them all. Then, a new call came through. Sarah Jensen. I answered on the first ring. Thorne, she said, her voice electric with the thrill of the hunt. No preamble. My source was anonymous, but the level of detail in that file, the metadata on the documents, it all points back to Meridian. It all points back to you. I'm running a follow-up piece in an hour. I need a comment. Was this a leak from your firm? She was offering me an exit, a chance to play the victim, to claim a rogue employee had stolen the files, to deny, obfuscate, and muddy the waters. It was the standard Washington playbook. It was also the coward's way out. It wasn't a leak, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. It was a disclosure. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her typing furiously. A disclosure? Are you on the record with that? Use this, I said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. Meridian Public Affairs was founded on the principle of integrity. When we learned that Senator Crane's actions were in direct and profound conflict with the values he espoused to the public and to this firm, we had a professional and ethical obligation to sever the relationship. We cannot and will not represent a client who fundamentally misled us and the voters. Another pause. Longer this time. She understood immediately. I wasn't the vengeful husband. I was the principled CEO. The whistleblower. I was changing the narrative from a personal vendetta to a corporate execution. "So you fired him by leaking his entire life to me?" she asked, a hint of professional admiration in her tone. "We terminated the contract." I corrected her. "You're the journalist. You just happened to be there to report on it." I hung up before she could ask another question. I had given her the quote that would frame the next 24-hour news cycle. Known's Marcus Thorne, the kingmaker, slays his own king for the sake of integrity. It was perfect. But a quote wasn't enough. I needed to formalize it. I turned to my computer and pulled up a blank document. My fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting a press release for Meridian Public Affairs. It was short, cold, and utterly devastating. It used the same corporate language I had given Sarah, but it was more direct. It announced the immediate termination of our contract with the entire Daniel Crane campaign organization, citing an, quote, irreparable breach of trust and a catastrophic failure to adhere to the ethical standards required of our clients. This was the strategic move. The leak could have destroyed my firm, along with Crane. It could have painted Meridian as incompetent, unable to control our own client, or worse, complicit. This press release cauterized the wound. It positioned us not as victims of the scandal, but as its arbiters. We weren't cleaning up a mess, we were taking out the trash. I attached the statement to an email and sent it to the national political press wire. Then I forwarded it to every single one of my partners and employees. The subject line was simple: our path forward. My message to them was clear. The old king is dead. Don't worry, the man who killed him is still in charge. I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the monuments. Below me, Washington was waking up to the chaos I had unleashed. My phone buzzed again. It was a news alert from the Post. Sarah's follow-up story was live. The headline was exactly what I had designed it to be. Meridian Public Affairs drops Senator Crane, citing irreparable breach of trust. They thought they could dismantle my life. Instead, I had just consolidated my power. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to build something new on the rubble. The term they use in demolition is progressive collapse. You don't blow up the whole building at once. You strategically weaken the key supports and let gravity, the natural order of things, do the rest. By 7 a.m., Daniel Crane's career was in a state of progressive collapse. The calls were no longer pleas for help. They were inquiries from vultures picking at the carcass. My partners, of course, were in full-blown panic. I summoned them to an emergency video conference at 7:30. 3 faces, pale and sleepless, stared back at me from my screen. Richard, our senior partner, spoke first, his voice tight. "Marcus, what in God's name have you done? Without consulting us? We have a fiduciary duty to our clients." I let the accusation hang in the air for a moment. "Our primary fiduciary duty is to this firm, Richard. Senator Crane and Eleanor decided to make Meridian a hostile takeover target. They were leveraging my work, our resources, to build their own private enterprise. They saw the firm as a disposable asset. I treated it as a threat." "A threat?" sputtered Linda, our communications head. "You nuked our most high-profile client on the front page of the Post. The party will crucify us." "The party is pragmatic," I countered, my voice low and even. "They don't back losers, and they certainly don't back liabilities. By 9 a.m. this morning, Daniel Crane will be the most toxic asset in Washington. We didn't just drop a client, we cauterized a wound before it became septic. I didn't burn a bridge. I launched a preemptive strike. We now have every ambitious congressman in a 50-mile radius wondering if we can do for them what we just undid for him. Our value has never been higher. Silence. They weren't looking at a reckless madman. They were looking at a king who had just executed a traitor in the town square to remind everyone who held the power. They were terrified, but they were also impressed. Richard nodded slowly, the fear in his eyes being replaced by cold, hard calculation. The coup was over. My firm was still mine. As if on cue, a call came through on my private line. The caller ID read, Senate Majority Leader. I put him on speaker for my partners to hear. Thorne, the familiar gravelly voice growled without preamble. You've created a 5-alarm fire. Crane is finished. His committee seats are gone. We're drafting a statement demanding his resignation as we speak. This is a mess. Every mess is an opportunity, Senator, I replied smoothly. There was a pause. Indeed, the leader conceded. The governor will need to appoint a replacement. We need someone clean, someone with no baggage, and we need to vet them yesterday. Your firm caused this problem. I expect your firm to be part of the solution. We'd be honored to assist, I said. I'll have a list of viable candidates on your desk by noon. I disconnected the call and looked back at my partners. Linda's mouth was hanging slightly open. I had just turned the biggest scandal in the firm's history into our most lucrative government contract. The final call came just before 8 a.m. An unknown number. I knew it was him. I let it ring twice, then answered, putting it on speaker. You son of a bitch, Daniel Crane rasped. His voice was raw, shredded. You destroyed me. You destroyed Eleanor. Let's be precise, Daniel, I said, my tone as calm as a frozen lake. You two planted the explosives. I just pushed the button. You were my life's work, my intellectual property. You decided to steal it, repackage it with my wife, and sell it as your own. You thought you could take the most valuable thing I owned. You were mistaken. This was personal. You used your power to settle a score, he screamed, his voice cracking. Everything is personal, I said, the words falling like chips of ice. You just forgot who had the power. You and Eleanor thought this was about love or ambition. You were wrong. This was a business transaction that went bad, and I'm simply liquidating the assets. I heard a choked sound, something between a sob and a gasp of fury. Then, silence. I ended the call. I walked back to the wet bar and poured another scotch. The sun was fully up now, bathing my office in a clean, bright light. The city was moving, the gears of power grinding on. They called it revenge. They called it a scandal. But as I looked out over the Capitol, at the monuments to order and consequence, I knew what it really was. It was gravity. It was natural justice. And I was simply the architect who knew where to find the weakest point in the foundation. I spent the next hour watching the narrative I'd authored become gospel. On every screen, pundits praised Meridian's decisive action. My face, professional and severe, was juxtaposed with Crane's, now haggard and disgraced. Eleanor was barely mentioned, a name in a subordinate clause, the disgraced senator's mistress, already fading into a historical footnote. My press release wasn't just a statement. It was being quoted as a masterclass in corporate integrity. I hadn't just won. I had written the official history of my own victory while it was still happening. My personal phone, the one I kept for family, vibrated on the desk. A single text message from Eleanor. Please, you didn't have to burn it all down, Marcus. There were other ways. I read the words and felt a profound sense of clarity. Not triumph. Not even satisfaction. Just the quiet hum of a complex equation finally being solved. She still didn't understand. She saw a marriage, a career, a life. I saw a system. A structure built on a flawed premise. Her betrayal wasn't just an infidelity. It was a foundational weakness that threatened the entire edifice I had painstakingly constructed. There was no other way. A compromised foundation can't be repaired. It has to be razed to the bedrock. You don't patch a lie. You eradicate it and build again on the hard, unforgiving truth. The world would call it revenge. But revenge is a messy emotional outburst. This was an audit, a correction. I had discovered a fatal corruption in the system I had built, and I had eliminated it with surgical precision. Daniel Crane believed he was entitled to power he hadn't earned. Eleanor believed she was entitled to a better deal. They forgot that in my world, power isn't a possession. It's a current you direct. They tried to divert it, assuming the architect wouldn't notice the change in the flow. I deleted her message without replying. She was part of the rubble now, an artifact of a failed project, and I had no interest in sifting through the debris. I turned back to the window, the morning sun glinting off the Capitol dome. The city looked different, cleaner. The fire was out, the smoke had cleared, the site was prepped. It was time to draft the new blueprints. So here's the question I've been wrestling with. Was I justified in leaking the story, or did I go too far by making a private betrayal a public spectacle? Let me know what you think in the comments.